The ground under the tires of the massive black luxury sports utility vehicle did not care about the millions of dollars riding above it as it shook the entire chassis on the unpaved road. A cloud of fine red dust billowed behind the shiny paint, settling quickly onto the jagged zinc roofs of the village houses that stood narrow and crowded together. Neighbors pushed aside their faded window curtains to catch a glimpse of the rare vehicle. Inside the smallest hut at the edge of the property, Ekena kept his eyes fixed on a wooden table covered with yellow paper notices. His father, Ukbin, let out a deep, dry cough from his small mat in the corner. The older man tried to sit up, but his fingers shook against the rough fabric as he struggled to look out the single window frame. Ekena walked over to steady his father, noticing how the bright afternoon sun highlighted the deep lines of worry on the old man's face. The heavy engine outside finally stopped, leaving only the sound of birds in the nearby mango trees. Two men wearing tailored dark suits stepped out of the vehicle first, their leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft African dirt. They opened the heavy back door with absolute care. Ajimka stepped out into the heat, her long silk dress catching the breeze as she looked toward the broken wooden door of the hut. She adjusted a heavy gold necklace around her neck, her steps slow but completely purposeful. Ekena pulled the door open, his heart beating violently against his chest as the shadow of the wealthy woman fell across the threshold. 10 years had passed since he last saw that face, yet the memory of a dirty little girl begging by the roadside rushed back instantly. His mind raced with the events of the previous night. He remembered how he had dragged this very woman out into the heavy rainstorm because he thought she was just another penniless traveler bringing trouble to their home, completely unaware of her true identity. He had desperately needed money to stop Madame Agatha from taking the house. In his panic, he had grabbed a strange stone pendant from Ajimka's neck and thrown her into the mud. Now, the child of the billionaire was standing in his home as a powerful ruler. Ajimka walked past him without a single word or look, her eyes staying entirely on the old man. She knelt down on the dirt floor, her expensive fabrics gathering dust as she pulled Ukbin into a gentle embrace. "I told you I would return for you, father," she whispered softly. Ukbin reached out his hands to touch her face, his voice breaking as tears filled his old eyes. Ekena backed away toward the wall, but two large security guards quickly blocked the exit. Ajimka stood up slowly and opened her small velvet handbag. She brought out the exact stone necklace Ekena had stolen, its surface now wiped clean of mud. She held it right in front of his face, her voice turning cold as ice as she broke the silence. "Before we go on, do you believe a person can ever truly change after obtaining immense wealth? And if you want to see how this family survives the consequences of that fateful night, please follow the channel to support our stories. And tell me where you're watching from." The smooth, polished stone of the necklace felt heavier in Ekena's hand than it had the night before, cold and silent under the sharp gaze of the billionaire's daughter. Ajimka stood completely still, her velvet purse resting against her wrist while her security team maintained their positions near the decaying doorway. The old man, Ukbin, shifted slightly on his thin bedding, his breath coming in a low rattle as he tried to look past the tall men in dark suits. "Where did you get that, Ekena?" Ukbin asked, his shaking voice barely reaching across the small interior of the hut. Ekena backed away until his shoulders hit the rough mud wall, his eyes darting toward the tiny open window frame. He tried to speak, but his throat felt entirely dry, his tongue refusing to form a believable lie in front of the woman he had wronged. Ajimka stepped closer, the soft fabric of her silk dress brushing against the dusty wooden table covered in warning notices. She reached out and took the necklace from his loose fingers, her hand steady and warm. "He took it from me while I was shivering on your porch," Ajimka said quietly, turning her face toward the old man. Ukbin closed his eyes for a brief moment, a deep sigh escaping his chest as the reality of his son's action settled into the room. Ekena dropped his head, his hands clenching into tight fists at his sides. He remembered the exact look of panic on Madame Agatha's face when she had demanded the rent money just 2 days earlier. He had acted out of desperation, thinking the stone was a useless trinket he could sell at the market to save his father from the streets. "I did it for the house, father," Ekena muttered, his voice barely a whisper against the silence of the room. Ukbin shook his head slowly, refusing to look at his son. Ajimka walked back to the bedside, her elegant posture contrasting sharply with the cracked, faded walls behind her. She placed a gentle hand on the old man's frail shoulder, her expression softening into genuine warmth. "Your son threw me out into a storm that could have taken my life, old man," she whispered, her words clear and direct. Ekena watched her from the corner, his mind working fast as he realized the true power of the family they had crossed. The guards moved an inch closer to him, their leather shoes creaking against the dirt floor. Ajimka turned her gaze back to the young man, her brown eyes completely devoid of anger, carrying only a quiet disappointment. She reached into her handbag once more and pulled out a single sheet of paper with a gold seal at the top. She placed it squarely on the wooden table, right on top of the yellow eviction notices. Ekena stepped forward, squinting at the bold black ink that detailed a property purchase worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The official document layout lay completely flat on the rough wood surface, its embossed gold crest reflecting the dim light of the single oil lamp. Ekena stared at the clean, crisp lines of the deed, his breathing slowing down to a quiet, steady rhythm as the truth slowly began to push away his panic. He blinked twice, trying to clear his vision, but the words stayed exactly the same. Ajimka owned every square inch of the land beneath their tattered hut. She moved away from the wooden table, her long silk skirt making a soft rustling sound against the packed dirt floor as she walked over to stand near the door. "This entire property belongs to my father's estate now," she said, her voice dropping to a low, calm tone that carried no anger. Ekena adjusted his stance, his fingers releasing their tight grip on the edge of his worn trousers. He looked down at his father, Ukbin, whose fragile body seemed smaller under the heavy wool blanket. The old man reached out a thin, trembling hand toward the daughter he had kept safe 10 years ago. "I knew your heart was good, Ajimka," Ukbin whispered, a tiny smile appearing at the corners of his mouth as he struggled to maintain his posture. Ajimka stepped forward and held his hand firmly between her own 2 palms. She nodded slowly, keeping her focus entirely on the old man's face while ignoring the guards standing rigid behind her. Ekena walked toward the center of the room, his voice unsteady but clear as he addresses the wealthy woman. "What are you going to do with us?" he asked, his arms hanging loose at his sides. Ajimka did not turn around immediately, choosing to fix the blanket around Ukbin's shoulders before she finally looked back. Her face remained smooth and serious, showing none of the emotion from the night she was thrown into the mud. "The land is secure, Ekena," she said directly, her eyes meeting his without a single blink. Ekena took a short breath, his mind replaying the harsh words Madame Agatha had shouted through the village just yesterday afternoon. The fear of the eviction notice was gone, but a different kind of tension took its place inside the hut. The 2 guards adjusted their heavy belts, their dark leather gloves catching the light as they waited for a command. Ajimka walked back to the wooden table and picked up the gold-sealed deed, slipping it gently into her velvet purse. She looked at Ekena one last time, her expression completely unreadable as she moved toward the exit. "Pack your father's things," she said quietly, her hand resting on the heavy metal latch of the door. Ekena stepped toward the bed, his hands shaking slightly as he gathered Ukbin's spare clothes into a small cotton bag. The old man watched his son with quiet eyes, his old face showing a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Ekena fastened the wooden buttons on his father's coat, his movements careful and steady. Outside, the engine of the luxury vehicle started up again with a deep, powerful rumble that vibrated through the mud walls. Ekena carried the small bag in one hand, using his other arm to support his father's weight as they slowly walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The village path was lined with neighbors who stood in absolute silence, watching the old farmer being guided toward the open door of the black sports utility vehicle. One guard reached out to help Ukbin climb inside the spacious leather interior, while the other man held the door firmly. Ekena paused on the dirt path, his leather sandals caked in fine dust as he looked back at the empty hut. Ajamka sat in the front seat, her gaze directed straight ahead as the driver shifted the vehicle into gear. Ekena took his place in the back beside his father, the door closing with a heavy thud that cut off the murmurs of the crowd. The large vehicle began to move forward, its tires rolling smoothly over the rocks and heading toward a massive, towering iron gate that Ekena had never noticed at the far edge of the valley. The massive black luxury vehicle rolled silently past the iron gates, its tires crushing the small gray gravel before stepping onto the smooth pavement of a long, private driveway. Ekena pressed his forehead against the cool, tinted glass, watching the neat rows of green hedges expand into wide landscaped lawns that stretched for several acres. His father, Ukbin, sat very still beside him, his breathing soft and shallow as he stared at the red leather dashboard with wide, curious eyes. The sheer size of the estate made the hut they left behind feel like a distant memory from another lifetime. Ekena clutched the small cotton bag of clothes tightly in his lap, his knuckles turning white as he tried to process the silent power of the woman sitting in the front seat. Ajamka did not turn around to check on them, her gaze remaining fixed on the massive stone fountain ahead, where water cascaded over 3 tiers of carved marble. The vehicle stopped smoothly under a grand portico, and the driver immediately stepped out to open the rear door. Ekena helped his father slide out onto the clean concrete, his arms supporting the old man's frail weight as Ukbin's leather sandals made a light scraping sound on the pristine floor. 2 women wearing immaculate blue uniforms stepped forward from the main entrance, bowing their heads slightly as Ajamka approached them. "Take Mr. Ukbin to the East Suite and ensure the private doctor examines his cough immediately," Ajamka said, her voice calm and absolute. The servants nodded quickly, gently guiding the old farmer toward a wide hallway filled with polished mahogany doors. Ukbin looked back at his son for a brief second, his old face showing a mixture of confusion and quiet trust before the door closed behind him. Ekena remained standing under the portico, his old sandals covered in fine dirt that now stained the spotless stone tiles. Ajamka turned to face him, her long silk dress catching the light from the crystal chandelier hanging above them. She held the stone necklace in her open palm, its simple surface catching a sharp glint from the sun. "Your father saved my life when I had nothing, Ekena," she said, her voice dropping to a direct, cold tone. Ekena backed away an inch, his tongue feeling dry as he looked at the heavy gold rings on her fingers. He remembered the exact feeling of the cold rain on his back when he had pushed her off their porch just 12 hours earlier. He had acted out of pure desperation to save their hut, but now he stood in a kingdom he could not understand. "I only wanted to pay the rent," Ekena muttered, his hands clenching into tight fists at his sides. Ajamka walked past him toward a large office room, her steps slow and entirely purposeful. She placed the stone necklace on a heavy glass desk, right next to a folder containing Madame Agatha's original land deed. Ekena followed her inside, his eyes widening as he read the bold letters transferring total ownership of their village valley to Ajamka's family corporation. "The landlord will never trouble your father again," Ajamka said, her gaze meeting his without a single blink. Ekena took a slow breath, the silence in the room growing heavier as a sharp knock on the door broke the quiet atmosphere. A man in a dark gray suit entered, holding a black leather case that he placed squarely on the desk. The man in the gray suit opened the black leather case with a quiet click, revealing a neat stack of legal documents and a small velvet tray containing several pieces of ancient gold jewelry. Ekena stepped back an inch, his eyes moving from the gleaming metal to the absolute calm on Ajimka's face. The heavy silence of the office made the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock feel incredibly loud. "This jewelry belonged to my mother, Ekena," Ajimka said, her voice remaining soft but perfectly level. She reached out and touched a wide gold cuff bracelet, her fingers moving across the intricate engravings with slow familiarity. Ekena cleared his dry throat, trying to find words to explain the absolute panic that had driven his choices the previous night. He looked down at his dusty sandals, realizing how completely out of place he was in this massive room filled with polished wood and leather. "I didn't mean to steal the necklace," Ekena whispered, his gaze shifting toward the large window that looked out over the sprawling green valley. Ajimka picked up the stone pendant from the glass desk, holding it next to the pieces in the tray. The stone matched the color and texture of the ancient gold perfectly, revealing its place as the central piece of a royal family heirloom. Desperation makes people do terrible things, but it also reveals their true nature, Ajimka said quietly, her brown eyes carrying a steady weight as she looked directly at him. Ekena felt a cold sweat on his palms, his mind replaying the exact moment he had unlatched the front door of the hut to push her out into the torrential rain. He had thought only of saving his father, Ukben, from Madame Agatha's hand, entirely unaware that the girl he was tossing into the mud possessed the power to destroy his family's future. "The landlord would have thrown my father onto the dirt road by morning," Ekena muttered, his posture stiffening as he tried to defend his actions. Ajimka walked over to the large window, her silk dress rustling against the dark floorboards as she stared out at the private road. She did not look at him when she spoke next. "My father bought this entire valley 48 hours ago to ensure your hut would stay safe forever," she said directly, her tone dropping even lower. Ekena froze, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow as his heart began to pound heavily against his ribs. The man in the gray suit stepped forward, turning a page in the document folder to reveal the final signature of the transaction. Ekena took a slow, shallow breath, realizing that his act of betrayal had occurred at the exact moment his family's salvation was being finalized. The realization settled into his chest like a heavy lead weight, cutting off his ability to form another excuse. Ajimka turned away from the glass window, her face remaining smooth and completely unreadable as she walked back to the desk. She closed the velvet tray with a firm snap, the sharp sound echoing through the quiet office room. "Your father's kindness 10 years ago bought you this land, but your choices last night have cost you my trust," she said, her voice turning firm and decisive. Ekena dropped his hands to his sides, his shoulders dropping as the door behind him opened slowly to reveal a waiting servant. Madame Agatha stood in the middle of the hut, her arms folded tightly across her chest as she watched the empty space where the old mattress had been. She tapped her foot against the packed dirt, the sound sharp and impatient in the confined area. Behind her, 2 young men shifted their weight, their faces stern and indifferent to the history of the room. Ekena walked toward the doorway, his steps heavy as he felt the crushing weight of the past hour. He looked at the patches on the walls where his father had hung photographs of their better years. Agatha turned her head slightly, her eyes narrow and cold as she pointed toward the corner of the small yard. "Get everything else out now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the humid air of the afternoon. Ekena reached for the final wooden stool, his fingers brushing against the rough wood grain as he carefully lifted it from the ground. He walked past the woman, his head held low while he avoided eye contact with the neighbors who gathered near the fence. Just as he reached the edge of the dirt path, a low rumble of an engine grew louder, vibrating against the dry earth. A black vehicle slowed down, turning off the main road and onto the narrow gravel leading to their home. Agatha paused, her hand rising to shield her eyes from the sun as she scrutinized the expensive car. Ekena stopped moving entirely, his pulse quickening when he saw the polished chrome grille catching the light. The vehicle pulled to a halt, the tires settling into the dirt with a soft crunch. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements precise and practiced as they scanned the area before opening the rear door. Ajimka stepped out, her blue silk dress flowing in the warm breeze as she stood before the men. She looked at the abandoned house, her expression unmoving as she surveyed the scene. Ekena felt a sharp knot of tension tighten in his throat while he watched her walk forward. Agatha shifted her posture, a fake, nervous smile spreading across her face as she stepped into the girl's path. "Is there something you need here?" the landlord asked, her tone changing to something sycophantic. Ajimka ignored the woman completely, her eyes locking onto Ekena, who stood frozen with the wooden stool still in his hand. The billionaire's daughter walked directly toward him, the distance between them shrinking with every steady step she took. She stopped only a few feet away, the air around them feeling static and thick with unspoken questions. Ekena could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that seemed to drown out the distant sound of the village. He looked at the girl he had cast out the night before, realizing that the balance of their entire world had shifted beyond his control. The man in the gray suit kept his posture perfectly rigid as he stood near the edge of the mahogany desk, holding the leather case like a shield. Ajimka turned her gaze toward the open door, where the servant stood waiting, her expression shifting from cold authority to a calm, controlled focus. Ekena felt the air in the room grow thinner, his hands still clutching the cotton bag containing his father's few remaining belongings. "I did not come here to destroy you, Ekena," Ajimka said, her voice echoing slightly against the high ceiling of the office. She walked toward him, her footsteps making almost no sound on the polished floorboards as she stopped just short of his personal space. Ekena looked down, his eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the carpet, while he struggled to find a single logical response to her presence. "You were scared for your father, and that fear clouded your judgment," she continued, her tone softening just enough to make the statement feel like a fact rather than an accusation. Ekena felt a sharp sting of shame, his mind racing back to the moment he had locked the door against her in the pouring rain. He had been convinced that her presence would bring nothing but disaster, yet she had held the keys to their survival all along. "I deserve whatever you decide to do," Ekena whispered, his voice cracking as he finally met her eyes. Ajimka picked up the folder containing the land deeds and held it out toward him, her hand steady and unwavering. "Your father is the only reason I am alive today," she said, her expression reflecting a brief flash of genuine memory from 10 years ago. She gestured toward the open door, where the servant still waited with a respectful bow. Ekena hesitated, his fingers trembling as he reached out to take the heavy folder from her grasp. The weight of the documents surprised him, feeling much heavier than paper should have as he realized they represented the permanent safety of their home. Ajimka walked past him toward the hallway, her silk dress sweeping lightly against the doorframe as she moved with absolute grace. "Take your father to the guest house, where the doctor can monitor his progress in comfort," she directed, her instructions clear and immediate. Ekena nodded, his throat tight as he turned to leave the office, his legs feeling heavy like lead weights. He walked into the long hallway, the walls lined with framed portraits of the corporation's history that seemed to watch his every move. Ukbin was already waiting near the end of the corridor, looking remarkably stronger as he stood without the support of the medical staff. Ekena rushed forward to help his father, his heart finally slowing to a steady pace as he realized the nightmare of the past few days had truly come to an end. Ajimka watched them from the doorway for a moment, her face unreadable as she checked the time on her watch, before she turned and disappeared into the depths of the mansion. Ekena walked slowly behind the servant, his feet heavy as they navigated the maze of high-ceilinged corridors adorned with golden frames. He looked at his own reflection in a passing mirror and barely recognized the man staring back with hollow, frightened eyes. The servant stopped before a heavy oak door near the back of the mansion and pushed it open, revealing a small, starkly furnished room. "This will be your quarters for the night," the man said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. Ekena entered the space, the smell of fresh linen and floor wax instantly filling his senses as he sat on the edge of the single bed. He stared at the smooth white wall, his fingers instinctively searching for the stone pendant he had stolen, only to remember it was now safely in Ajimka's possession. A quiet knock at the door broke his focus, and he looked up to see Ukben standing in the threshold with the help of a wooden cane. The old man entered the room slowly, his breathing sounding ragged in the quiet space as he leaned against the doorframe for support. Ekena jumped up to help his father, his movements frantic and clumsy as he pulled out a chair. "You should be resting, father," Ekena said, his voice thick with guilt as he tried to wrap the blanket tighter around the old man's shoulders. Ukben waved him away, his eyes scanning the simple room with a look of deep, lingering disappointment that stung more than any physical blow. "I have spent my life teaching you to be honest, Ekena," Ukben whispered, his gaze dropping to the floor where a small patch of dust sat undisturbed in the corner. Ekena gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles turning white while he struggled to maintain his balance against the weight of his father's words. "I only thought about the bills, about the landlord taking the roof from over your head," Ekena argued, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and lowered it to a desperate plea. Ukben sat down heavily, the wooden chair creaking under his weight as he stared directly into Ekena's face. "The landlord could take the roof, but he could not take your integrity unless you gave it to him," the old man said, his tone flat and devoid of its usual kindness. Ekena opened his mouth to reply, but the words failed him, leaving only a bitter taste of regret that made his stomach churn. Outside the window, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, orange streaks of light across the room. The sudden sound of a vehicle engine, starting near the front entrance, made both men turn their heads toward the hallway. Ekena walked to the window, peering through the glass to see Ajimka stepping into her black SUV alone, her posture rigid and her face turned away from the mansion. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as Ajimka stood on the wide stone terrace, her gaze directed toward the horizon. A gentle breeze stirred the fabric of her dress, but she remained motionless, watching the distant hills that bordered the estate. Ekena walked out of the guest suite, his movements cautious as he stepped onto the cool patio tiles for the first time since their arrival. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, his posture stiffened by a lingering sense of uncertainty. Ukben sat in a wooden chair nearby, his eyes closed as he enjoyed the warmth of the sun on his face, looking healthier than he had in months. Ajimka turned her head slowly, her expression neutral as she watched Ekena approach the stone railing. She leaned against the cool marble, her fingers resting lightly on the surface while she looked out at the rolling green landscape. "Your father has decided to stay here permanently, Ekena," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet terrace. Ekena looked toward his father, then back at the woman who held the future of their entire family in her hands. He felt a deep sense of relief wash over him, though the weight of his previous choices still sat heavy in his chest. "He seems finally at peace here," Ekena replied, his voice barely rising above the sound of the nearby fountain. Ajimka nodded once, her eyes scanning the edge of the property where the thick forest met the manicured edge of their land. She pulled a small envelope from her pocket and placed it on the railing between them. Ekena looked at the crisp white paper, his heart skipping a beat as he hesitated to reach for it. "This contains the papers for a small plot of land near the village," Ajimka explained, her tone completely devoid of any lingering resentment. Ekena stared at the envelope, his breath hitching as he realized the weight of what she was offering him. It was not a handout for him to live off, but a chance to build something of his own, far away from the shadows of his past mistakes. He reached out and took the paper, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief second before she pulled back. "You can choose to stay here and work for the estate, or you can take this chance to start over elsewhere," she said simply. Ekena looked at his father, then back at the horizon, the path forward finally feeling clear and wide open. He bowed his head once, a gesture of respect that felt more genuine than any word he had spoken in the last few days. Ajimka turned and began walking toward the main entrance, her silhouette sharp against the bright morning light. Ekena watched her disappear into the cool shade of the mansion, knowing that his life had changed in ways he never thought possible when he woke up that morning in their old hut. He looked at the envelope in his hand, feeling the solid structure of a future that he had to earn one day at a time.